through electrolysis, makes hydrogen, which is then transported to a car, and on the car, using a fuel cell, makes electricity again. So you start with electricity, you go to hydrogen, you then go to electricity again. And if you look at the three little things on the left, what you see is, this is the wind turbine. It has to be converted to DC to do the electrolysis. Here is the electrolysis. And each one of those, as you go down, is a process. The fuel cell is down there somewhere behind the mask. And when you have been through all these processes, you lose 75 to 80% of the energy that you started with. And that is why fuel cells won't work. It's not that they are inefficient. They're a little more efficient than internal combustion engines. It's not that they are unreliable. They are extremely unreliable, but it's not that they are unreliable. It's not that the fuel that they use is almost completely unmanageable, hydrogen. It is almost completely unmanageable, but that's not the problem. The problem, as you now all know, is that the fuel cell is a victim of the second law of thermodynamics, which says that every transformation of energy involves a loss. And there are so many transformations of energy here, even though many of them are quite efficient, 90%, 95%, so on, you multiply all those numbers together and you finish up with 25 or 30%. And you compare that with the grid connection, where the electricity, as in the Calgary C train, does not go through that complicated process of turn into hydrogen, turn back into electricity, but is just fed to the wheel, fed to the motor. You've got a 10% distribution loss. And in an energy-constrained world, which is what we're going to have, where you start off with precious wind turbine energy, and with one system you lose 80% of it, and the other system you lose only 10% of it, there's going to be no contest. Grid-fed vehicles are going to prevail. Yes, battery vehicles will be used. Yes, even internal combustion engines for some purposes. But because of their efficiency, and also for another reason, their adaptability, we are going to see grid-fed vehicles prevail. You think of grid-fed vehicles as being very inflexible. They have to, the trolley bus has to stay on the wires. But there's a way in which they are supremely flexible, and that is the trolley bus will work from the wires no matter how the electricity is produced. So you could start with a coal-fired generating plant, and you could move to a natural gas plant, and you could move to a nuclear plant if that was what you wanted, or you could move to wind turbines as in Calgary. And you can make all those transitions, improving your energy source as you go along, and the trolley bus will still run because it is supremely flexible as far as the ultimate source of the electricity that is used. Whereas typically, if you change the fuel for a vehicle, even only a little bit, you have to change the whole flipping vehicle. You know, when it was decided not to have lead in gasoline, that was a huge kerfuffle, if you remember it. You know, trying to figure out, was this a leaded car or an unleaded car, and you put the leaded stuff in the unleaded stuff, and it cost you $2,500 before you blinked. Now, trolley buses are not necessarily restricted to being on the wire. The beautiful triple articulated trolley bus that you see at the back there in Geneva is confined to being on the wire because it has no battery. Versions of it have an auxiliary diesel motor that can drive the generator, that can drive the wheels, and that's one way of doing it. This beautiful system in Rome can also do that, but from a battery, and it can go for up to 10 kilometers. The Vancouver bus that you had here for several months can go, I'm not sure what the distance is, but maybe half a kilometer or something like that, off wire. 1 kilometer? Okay, thank you.
That consumes 10% of the battery.
Mm-hmm.
That only consumes
10% of the battery?
Yeah, so you still have 90% left. Those are the specs.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. There is a certain flexibility of routing. The other issue that comes around electricity is how much more would you need? And this is a very active subject in the literature at the moment. People are wising up to the idea that electric vehicles are the future, but they've got this big question about, what does it do to the electricity supply? Well, in the book we estimate that typically, although it varies enormously from situation to situation, that if all land transport were electrified in a rich country, you would need about 45% more electricity, or you would need 45% of the electricity that you are using now. And if you did nothing else, it would be 45% more. And of course, people have problems with the supply now. So where on earth is all that going to come from? Well, we looked into that and figured out that half of it could very simply come just from conservation. I mean, the rate at which we have been increasing our use of electricity is in most places, there are some exceptions, is just astonishing. This is Toronto Hydro's conservation gang, by the way. There's nothing significant. But with always on TVs and things that were powered that were never powered in the past, we are just using to cut back by 25% in industry and lighting. I mean, we tried to turn the lighting here down more than this, and we couldn't. We would have been in darkness, and so we wasted. We could have had it a quarter of this light, and we would have still all seen each other. And that is often typical of commercial and institutional buildings. So 25% we said can come from conservation without pain, and we demonstrated. And the other half we said could come from renewable resources. And the renewable resource that on a worldwide basis we think is the most promising is high temperature solar thermal energy, where you take the sun's rays, concentrate it, boil up water or better oil, high temperature oil, and drive a turbine, generate electricity. And the scope for this is huge. This is, if you see this little dot here, this is a dot about an area about 200 kilometers across in the California, Arizona desert. And that, with solar, high temperature solar generators, turbines will fuel the whole of the current electricity supply of the United States. German interests are enormously strongly investigating using the northern Sahara Desert to feed Europe. Already in the United States there are several of these systems in place. Regrettably, it will only work efficiently at the right latitudes and without the clouds. And the best places are the brown, and then the darker yellow, and the paler yellow, and the blue are where it won't work. And unfortunately, the whole of Canada is in the blue, as you see. But we could perhaps tap into the Arizona desert and swap oil for electrons. But that doesn't mean, I mean, that's only the best one among many. Last year, there was a paper done for the Royal Society in the UK looking at the potential for marine energy to meet UK electricity needs. 30% could come from marine energy. Marine energy is tidal barrages, capturing the energy of waves, capturing the energy of ocean currents, different from tides, and so on. Well, we're no slouches on that front. We have one of the only 2 tidal energy generators in the world in Nova Scotia, near Annapolis. We have the longest coastline of any country in the world.